Day 9 of the 2024 U.S. Championships saw Carissa Yip's incredible streak come to an end as she lost her round 9 game to FM Megan Lee. Of course, Carissa is still leading the U.S. Women's Championship with 2 rounds left to play and is looking very likely to win her second straight title. Going into the open results, tournament leader Fabiano Caruana drew with Awonder Liang after an interesting game in the Italian. The only decisive result came from Leinier Dominguez, who overturned a dangerous position to defeat Sam Sevian. With 2 rounds to go, Caruana continues to lead with 5.5 points, followed closely by Awonder Liang at 5, with Ray Robson, Levon Aronian, and Hans Niemann all tied for third with 4.5 points each. In the U.S. Women's Championship, tournament leader Carissa Yip lost her game today to Megan Lee, ending her streak at 8 wins. She now sits at 8 out of 9, with her closest rival Begim Tokhirjonova 1.5 points behind after Begim defeated Irina Krush in today's game. Meanwhile, Alice Lee and Megan Lee are both tied for third place with 5.5 points. Taking a look at today's games, we'll start with the game between Caruana and Liang, which started off as an Italian game, knight f6, d3, and this one seemed to follow pretty normal theory for the first several moves. But here after knight g6, rook e1, rook e8, Caruana spends a lot of time here and plays d4 in this position, which may have been him misremembering his prep. I'm not exactly sure what happened here exactly. Engines give white a very, very tiny plus here after bishop to c2. After d4, the issue is black takes on d4. White grabs the bishop on b6, a takes b6, c takes d4, and black can take this pawn on e4, which Awonder does. Now, white's idea here is to win back the pawn. Bishop takes f7 check, which is played. King takes f7, rook takes e4, but this doesn't seem to give white actually any real advantage. All he's done is won his material back, and it seems like black is actually pretty solid here and is certainly not worse. So Awonder took on e4. He had other options as well. Knight g5 check, knight takes e4. White has won back the material, but the position is basically equal. However, the game does continue for a bit here. Queen d4, queen f5, bishop e3, knight e5. Now Caruana goes queen to e4, but with this move, he's actually going into a worse endgame. The engine here actually starts to like black. He could have made a lot of other moves here. I think f3, b3, and the position is reasonable. But queen e4, maybe not the best decision here by Fabi. Now black had some chances with knight to d3, possibly knight c4. Instead, Awonder goes rook a5, knight c3, and b5. Also an interesting way to play, as black starts to play on the queen side. But white goes b4 here, bishop to d2. And now c5, and with this move, things actually just start to kind of liquidate. Black could have kept more chances alive with something like king to f7 or knight to c4. After c5, white takes on c6, goes knight to e4, knight c4, and a lot of stuff here starts to get traded off. After f3, bishop f5, knight g3, and now a4. And at this point, black doesn't really have any more winning chances, and pretty soon here, the players just found a way to trade everything off. Rook d4, rook c8, and eventually we got into this endgame, which of course was soon drawn. So with that game, Caruana stays in the lead. He's half a point ahead of Awonder, who's in clear second place with 5. Only decisive game of the day actually happened in this one between Sevian and Dominguez. And this was actually a rather sharp position, came out of the English, but actually ends up in this position, which more resembles an open Sicilian. At this point, Sevian goes a3, and he forces black to take on c3. Dominguez gives up the bishop pair, and we get a very, very double-edged position where white has these weakened pawns on the queen side, but of course is very active with the 2 bishops. So bishop g2, queen c7, castles, bishop a6, and now g4. Very, very fun play from Sevian, who's looking to go g5, and then rook f3, rook h3, lifting the rook to the h-file, and then bringing the queen in with queen h5. Dominguez plays knight d7, rook f3, and now he kind of panics here with this move f5, trying to avoid getting mated. At this point, white should have taken immediately on f5 and pushed g5. The engine was giving this as being very, very advantageous for white, stopping black's knight from coming to f6, and then getting ready to play rook h3 and bishop d5 check next move. And it's very, very dangerous for black's king. You can already see ideas of mates of rook takes h7 and queen h5. But this was a missed opportunity. Sevian goes rook h3 instead, but now knight g4, knight f6, g5, knight to g4. Black is able to activate this piece. White is still better here, but things get very, very complicated. Now Dominguez breaks with d5. Sevian grabs this pawn, goes rook to g1, knight e7. And with this move, Dominguez is making a practical decision to sacrifice the rook on a8. Now at this point, white is better according to the engines if he plays the move rook to e1 with idea to meet bishop check with knight to f3. And black has a bit of compensation here, but it seems like white is still doing well with the extra exchange. Instead, we saw bishop to d4, but now check knight f3 and knight g6. And all of a sudden, the position is completely turning around. Knight takes f4 is a big problem. And yeah, Sevian wasn't able to defend this position from here. He goes queen to e6, but this pretty much loses the game after knight takes f4, takes on f5, black takes the rook on h3, rook takes g4. Now black is not yet up material, but has this huge pin along the diagonal, and he goes queen to e7 here. Very, very strong move by Dominguez, threatening rook to f8 and targeting this knight on f3. Sevian tried rook to g3, but now queen e1 check. Nice move using the pin. King to g2, queen e2 check. If the king goes back to h1, there would be queen f1 check, and black is actually winning. For example, bishop g1, knight f2 is mate. Otherwise, the knight on f3 drops. So Sevian takes on h3, but now there's bishop c8 and black wins the queen. So queen takes, rook takes. White has 2 pieces for the queen, but it's really not enough. And Dominguez showed good technique here to convert. Rook f5, check, takes, king takes. White's rook is pinned. He can't take on g7, which would have been a nice mate. And the knight is hanging. And black is turning rook h5 check and rook f3 check and so on. And so it's game over. So nice win by Dominguez. Very, very sharp game, but he picks up the only decisive result of the day. Moving on to U.S. Women's Championship, we'll take a look at the key game between Carissa Yip and Megan Lee, the game that broke Carissa's streak. This one was another Italian game. And actually, white was doing quite well out of the opening in the early middle game in this one, as black plays g5 and castles kingside. And in the long run, black's kingside here is definitely experiencing some big problems. So ab5, knight d7 here. White pushes d4. Black takes on d4, knight takes d4. And now white has access to this very nice f5 square, which is a huge, huge weakness for black. But rook f8, f3, knight e5. Up until this point, Carissa has played very, very well. But here she misses a chance to strike with b6, which would kind of ruin black's structure here. Bishop takes b6, for example. White can take on b6, rook a1, queen a1, cb6, and then knight comes to f5. Let's say queen f8, for example, queen to b1. And yeah, black's pawns on the queen side are soon going to fall. White's knight on f5 is super strong, and white has a huge advantage here. And instead, we saw knight to e3, king h7, and now h4. So white is trying to open up the king side this way. But takes, knight comes into f5, king g6, queen d2, knight h5. And black's position is surprisingly solid here. Not so easy for white to break through with the king holding the g-pawn. So bishop h2, bishop c5 gets played. White trades off a pair of rooks. And now Carissa pushes f4. Things start to get very, very spicy here. f6 from black with the idea that after takes, d takes, black is winning back the piece on d4. Now here, white had another chance to get the edge with the move g4. This is a tough move to play because in all of the previous positions, g4 would have been a huge blunder, for example, here, as it would allow knight takes f3, winning the queen due to the pin on the diagonal. But after f4, f6, takes, here, of course, g4 is now playable. There's no knight f3 check. This would force knight f4. White could take on f4, for example, go queen h7, and white would still have some initiative here. Black has to play queen h7, takes, for example. White is going to lose the piece back, but should be a little bit better with the nice pawns in the center. Good knight as well. Instead, we see king h1. Black takes on d4, goes bishop to b6, queen to d3, but now rook to h8, and all of a sudden, black starts to pick up the initiative. There's ideas of both knight f4 and possible knight g3 checks in the position, and white's center is under a lot of pressure. So Carissa here goes rook to f1, but now knight to f4, very strong move by Megan here, hitting the queen on d3. Queen to d2 is played, Otherwise, there could be queen h7, which would be very, very dangerous for white's king. Queen d2 has the idea to play g3 and defend this way. But after queen d2, black takes on b5, picks up a pawn. Carissa played rook to e1, but this ends up being a very unfortunate blunder, as after bishop a5, black is just winning more material, this time the exchange, and it's all over. White doesn't have enough with this knight on f5. So queen a2 was Carissa's try, but now bishop takes c1, a couple checks from the knight, the king drops back, another check, queen e8, black covers all the checks, and now just has an extra rook, and a nice combo to finish it off here from Megan. After rook takes h2, queen h5 check, king g1, and now bishop f2. Force the resignation, as after white takes the bishop, there's queen e2 check, followed by queen takes g2 with a nice mate. So very, very nice game by Megan as she gets herself into a tie for third place. Unfortunate loss for Carissa as she loses her chance for the perfect 11-0 $64,000 Bobby Fischer prize. But of course, Carissa still in very, very good chances to repeat as the two-time champion. Next up, we've got the game between Irina Krush and Begim Tokhirjonova. This was a key game for Begim to win as she cements herself in second place in the standings. This one was very, very unclear strategically up until this point when white pushes c5. According to the engines, b5 would have been a better pawn break. After c5, it seems like black is the one that gets control, especially over all the light squares on the queen side, and gets the advantage. So king h2 here, rook to d8, playing for the d file, queen takes d6, and now bishop to b3, stopping white from challenging the d file with rook to d1. So at this point, white's position here, very, very tough to play, and Begim starts to play a fantastic middle game to capitalize on her edge. So f5, queen to g2, knight d6, takes, queen takes, big threat e4 here. So white takes this pawn on c6, but now queen takes f2, and material is equal, but black's pieces are coming in. So knight f4 can't take the knight because of the queen. Instead, we see queen takes g2, rook to c8, bishop a1 defending the bishop, and now rook f2. Black's pieces once again coming in. Rook to c5, king h7, knight to f5. White having a lot of weaknesses here. She grabs a pawn on b5, but now black trades rooks and goes bishop to d5 and is lining up against this knight on g2. So king h3, bishop drops back to e6, g4. If the king were to drop back, then knight takes e3, and black is soon going to be just winning the game. So g4 was the try from Krush, but now takes, king takes, and knight d4 check. Very, very nice finish from Begim here. King to g3, rook f3 check, and white resigned as next move is going to be king h2, rook h3 mate. So very nice win from Begim as she takes down the 8-time champion and keeps her chances alive actually for first place if Carissa doesn't score at least 1 point in the next 2 rounds. Begim will still have chances to catch up, but otherwise Begim looking like a surefire pick for the silver medal. So that takes us into tomorrow's round 10, which is going to be the penultimate round. We've got a number of key matchups. Carissa Yip is black against Anna Zatonskih. We have Alice Lee white against Begim. And in the open section, Caruana is going to be black against Leinier Dominguez. So should be a very, very dramatic 2 final rounds ahead of us coming up. And hopefully I'll catch you back here for the recap. Until then, take care.